I'm really excited about our next guest because he's an all-around smart guy. He's probably one of the smartest people I've ever met. He is the chief Washington correspondent of the Fox News Channel. He's making his debut appearance here on our program. Very proud to say my good friend James Rosen is on the Newsmaker Hotline. How are you, James?
Brian and Larry, so honored to be with you guys. This is a long time coming.
Yeah, it is, and thank you for being here. Now, look, you covered the State Department. You actually traveled with John Kerry, the new Secretary of State, not long ago, and so I got to talk to you about what's going on in North Korea. You know, we came on pretty strong. We sent F-22s, we sent B-2s, we sent a bunch of guided missile cruisers out there to sort of back up South Korea with war games, and it seems that the North Koreans took great offense to that, and now I'm reading all these stories that say that the Obama administration is dialing back the rhetoric. What happened?
Well, to begin with, and to borrow a phrase from Boardwalk Empire, the North Koreans could find the insult in a bouquet of roses. By all accounts, the U.S. officials detected a sort of escalation in rhetoric that exceeded even the North Korean standards, and that's what resulted in our displays of force along the lines you mentioned. Some have actually detected in recent days a slight easing of the rhetoric on the part of the North Koreans. Their recent suggestions that they want to focus more on the development of their impoverished economy, which today stands even smaller in total GDP terms than it did 20 years ago, and certain other developments. But look, it's a very tense time on the Korean Peninsula for our allies in that region and for policymakers here in Washington.
Well, but we read that this all was part of a playbook that was developed and signed off on by the President of the United States as how we were going to treat North Korea during these war games and what we were going to do and what we were going to say. So, and now that we're pulling back, did we sort of go in too strong? Did we make a mistake in that regard?
Well, that's been suggested as well, that perhaps the U.S. displays of force were serving not to dampen this situation, but rather further inflame it. We'll never truly know, because to truly know is to require some understanding of the depths of the North Korean mindset, which in a society as theirs, which remains as closed to the outside world as Pyongyang is, it is hard to fathom.
James Rosen, during the Cold War, a lot of these international incidents were often seen as proxies between the Soviet Union and the United States. How does China fit into this current standoff with North Korea? They always seem to be sort of behind the scenes with North Korea.
China is not fitting into the current scenario as centrally, perhaps, as the United States might like. Look, North Korea is a client state of China. From Beijing, North Korea receives 45% of its food, 80% of its consumer goods, and 90% of its imported energy. There is no question that the Chinese could, with a certain application of economic might, bend North Korea to its will, but it might come at the cost of breaking North Korea's regime, which is something the Chinese have always been wary of, because they don't want to see 2 million North Korean refugees stream across their border into China, where the government already has enough problems feeding its people. So for China, it's always been a delicate balance between trying to influence the North Korean regime, but without collapsing that regime.
And so going forward, where do you think this standoff will resolve itself, and how it might resolve itself?
One critical juncture point that's coming up, Larry, is April 15. That is the day that marks the birthday of the founder of modern North Korea, Kim Il-sung, the grandfather of the current dictator, Kim Jong-un. And typically, we see on that day great mammoth displays of national sovereignty and pride. And it's conceivable that, having had a good month-plus ramp-up of rhetoric and action, the North Koreans may choose that juncture point as one at which they can start to abate and indeed focus, as they say they want to do, on their economy.
I want to talk to you about another story that you have worked endlessly on, along with other people there at the Fox News Channel, and that's Benghazi. During your interview with Secretary Kerry, it was revealed that there is a Benghazi survivor at Walter Reed. I think that was new information that you broke. Why is it that it's so hard to get information about Benghazi, and why is it that we can't talk to these people who survived the attack?
The new information that came from my interview with Secretary of State Kerry in Doha, Qatar on March the 5th was that for the first time the Secretary disclosed that he personally had visited a survivor of the Benghazi attacks who was recovering at Walter Reed. We had actually previously reported that at Fox News but it was on the basis of eyewitness testimony. The interview was where Kerry confirmed as much. As to your question of why we haven't heard from the Benghazi survivors, I put that very question to Secretary of State Kerry, and he said, I don't know that I have an answer for you on that. And he said he was furthermore unaware of the status of requests for anyone to speak with the survivors. That appeared odd to me because the Secretary of State had already been beseeched by lawmakers in writing for access to the survivors. It's conceivable simply that that's attributable to Kerry's newness on the job on March 5, only about a month in at that point. The fact is that a number of these Benghazi survivors were and remain intelligence assets of one kind or another, and I suspect that has a lot to do with why we haven't heard from a lot of them.
James Rosen, Fox News chief Washington correspondent, as our guest, also the author of The Strongman, the definitive book on John Mitchell and the Watergate.
If you buy it, you can also use it to lift weights with.
Right, it's a biggie. James, I got to ask you, you and I have something in common here, and I need your advice on something. My understanding is you actually shared close quarters with Brian Wilson for quite some time.
8.5 years. Who's counting?
Joy, you know what? I need your help. How do you deal with working with Wilson on such a side-by-side basis?
It's a fair question, and I'll tell you.
Here it comes.
I have to tell you that, I was always grateful for all that time that I got to spend with Brian Wilson, not merely because he's a generous guy with a heart as big as his native Texas, but also because rooming with him afforded me a continuing day-to-day opportunity to exert a civilizing impact on a savage character desperately in need of it.
All right. You know what?
And by the way, he's the only guy that does an impression of me.
Oh, we got to hear the Wilson impression, James.
Oh, man. Well, I'll tell you, fellas, I'm a storyteller. I just got to have them extra 3 minutes and 53 seconds now. Wilson.
That is brilliant. Well done, James Rosen. And by the way, I need to out you here, Wilson. Brian Wilson often does his Brit Hume impersonation, but I happen to know for a fact that he is doing an impression of James Rosen doing an impression of Brit Hume.
Now, look, fellas, all of us enjoy some good sophomoric humor in a drive time format.
All right.
There comes a time when it goes too far.
That's right.
Oh, Juan.
All right, James. I'm sorry I'm sorry I've dragged you into all of that.
Are you kidding? He fits right in.
Listen, we'd love to have you back, James. It's great to have you on. I just got to say that James said some nice things about me. Genuinely one of the smartest guys in Washington. And by the way, sort of a Renaissance man. He writes. He's an artist. He does caricatures that are just amazing, and probably the best mimic that I have ever known.
And can I get this in writing?
Yeah,
is that possible?
Yeah, it is. It's a good guy, and I'm really glad to have you on the show.
You said it exactly how James wrote it out for you. That was the trade-off to get him on. James Rosen, thanks.
The check will be in the usual spot. Gentlemen, I was honored. Let's make this a regular thing.
I love it.